today who's giving you a little bit of intro music, which we think is awesome. I know, live music intro. Brought to you by Dr. Fasano.
It's just for Michael Okun.
So we're gonna get started. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Thank you, Dr. Subramanian, Dr. Fasano, for joining us. We're really excited for our program. Just a couple of quick, housekeeping. So if we have questions, those are going to be answered in the chat. So if you navigate, if you're on a computer, down to your toolbar, there's a little, it says chat. If you click on that, you can actually, if everybody wants to put in where they're tuning in from. I know I'm here in Southern California. We have our Arizona peeps. So would love to hear where you're coming in from. And as you guys do that, I'm going to kick it over to Dr. Subramanian to get us started.
Thank you. Thank you to the PMD Alliance for hosting. Welcome, everyone. Yeah, so we had some live music intro today. I'm so excited to have my friend Alfonso Fasano, who is an amazing, another renaissance man of movement disorders. So we continue to be physically distanced, but socially connecting here through this virtual medium, and hope to continue to expand our horizons and learn a lot about Parkinson's and movement disorders, and continue to branch out to our global network of amazing doctors and colleagues. And so I would love to tell you a little bit about Dr. Fasano. So he is a professor at the University of Toronto, which we share that because I am a U of T alumni, proud U of T alumni. I'm from Canada. I spent my childhood in Hamilton, Ontario, which is a town about an hour away from where Alfonso is right now, and my parents are there socially distancing from me, which I'm very sad about. Alfonso and I spoke about his...
And I'm going there to take care of them, don't worry.
He's gonna go over and have a meal because he misses his own parents.
So I'm going, yes.
He's socially distancing from his family in Italy. So Alfonso's from Italy. He did his training in Rome. He did a PhD, started a PhD there and moved over to Germany. Did some training with Dr. Deutschel and Dr. Wolfman at the University of Kiel in Germany, and then joined the faculty at the University of Toronto, where he's the co-director of the movement disorders program, surgical program, as well as doing a number of other things, including writing music. He actually wrote the promotional music for a book that is going to come out of one of our friends, Dr. Espai, and then he's also
Benjamin Stetcher. I think it might be online. Yeah, it is online. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yes, I think he might be joining us.
I wish I could have the book in my hands to promote it, and I'm waiting for the book to arrive. In the meantime, I want to promote this other book from our friends Michael Okun, Bas Bloom, that I'm sure you all know very well. So I hope the next time I'll have Brain Fables by Benjamin and Alberto in my hands.
Absolutely. So many great offerings out there, so much to read, and really some activism around ending Parkinson's disease happening. We'll be having Ben and Alberto on actually on this series to promote their book when it is about to launch, which I think is later in August. And and we'll maybe play your music as part of that intro. Thanks so much, Alfonso, for joining us. Maybe you could teach us a little bit about your journey, why you chose neurology, did this PhD in this field, ended up doing movement disorders, and why you love DBS.
Well, I never said that I love DBS, and I would say I also try to, I don't want to love too much what I do, because otherwise you end up doing this all the time, and you got to be a little detached from things, especially if you want to do a good job, especially if you're strongly believe that something is the case and then you find that it's not. If you love your ideas too much, you might not be able to really change your mind, and therefore make sure that this field progresses. But anyways, as for my journey, I don't have much to say. Basically, like many things in my life, including being now in Toronto, things happen by chance. And I don't know why I did medicine. I don't know. There are some reasons, but I know that I chose neurology because I was fascinated by neurons, because I always consider neurons to be a kind of enigma in the universe, because it's matter that becomes self-conscious, and that's a unique situation in physics. DBS is a little more of a story, but I was trained in the first hospital that did DBS in Italy. So ever since I was a student, since I was like 20 probably, I was surrounded by DBS patients. And then I was lucky enough to be trained by neurologists that told me to invest time in DBS. And then I went to Kiel, as you said, because Kiel is a very good center for deep brain stimulation. And I went there specifically to answer a question. And that's another thing that I strongly believe to be the case in clinical research. I mean, in research in general, there's no point in doing research without a practical aspect. So I think patients are the goal of research, and patients are, the final receivers of what we do when it comes to research. So that's why I'm not really a fan of animal studies or all this research done just to publish a paper. So back then, I was seeing a lot of patients with DBS, and I was particularly following people that had DBS years before, and I will notice that they will have a lot of gait problems or balance problems. And back then, this is 2007, 2008, people will only say this happens because it's disease progression. But it didn't really make sense to me, because the type of gait disorders that I saw was very different than what you expect from other Parkinson's patients. For instance, some patients will have gait problems right after surgery. So I went to Kiel because I had this question. So what happens to patients with Parkinson's? Why is their gait worse sometimes after surgery? And I came back with a couple of answers, which was my thesis in the end. And ever since did that, I really fell in love with locomotion and other important aspects of human behavior, communication, locomotion. We always talk about tremor and, fluctuations maybe, but, or at least the public opinion thinks that Parkinson's is that. But actually what people want to do is to talk, to walk, to go where they want without falling. This is really what matters to patients, and it's been proven by many studies. And this is why I invested time in this.
That's amazing. Well, I thank you for your hard work, and you've been really prolific in publishing and really a patient advocate, and you are teaching all over the world. I saw you on a series of the Indian Movement Disorder Society of India. So really spreading the word and your good work. So maybe Alfonso, without further ado, I know you've created a slide series for us a little bit to teach us, and maybe we can start there, and we'll get some questions going after that. So we'll let you share.
Yeah, very good. So I have some few things to say before I start. The first one is that I was given permission to patients that you see in these videos to be shown, but usually this is assuming that patients are shown only to a medical audience, like doing conferences, teaching to students or scientific publications. So I really had a hard time to really select certain videos where the face of the patient wasn't visible. I did my best to really be respectful of people's privacy. And so I hope that you forgive me if some videos are, for instance, cut or trimmed in a strange way. The other thing I need to say is that I was asked to talk about the future of deep brain stimulation, but as you'll see, I'll talk more about the past, because as always, we want to learn the future from the past, and particularly from mistakes and false beliefs that people had in the past. And I would say that I have quite a dense slide deck. I don't really need to go through all the slides. And I would rather prefer, as you know, that you interrupt me at any moment if there are questions, or if you want me to just shut up and move on, whatever you want. So I want this to be very interactive, and I'm pleased to see there are a lot of participants. Okay, so those are the things I wanted to say up front. These are my disclosures. This is also equally important because I have conflict of interest basically with all the possible companies, except the Chinese ones that are in the DBS market. So I always try to be as scientific as possible, but I think it's important for you all know that I also have financial conflict of interest. But the biggest conflict of interest is this one, because clearly it's a pleasure for me to be invited by you, and this picture sees it all. And maybe this is why you invited me, I don't know. But in case people are wondering why certain people get invited. I guess Michele Tagliati did a much better job. You can tell it's more Italian than me probably in his kissing. But anyhow, so that's my other disclosure. So this is the outline of my presentation, and I will say a few things about DBS when it's not really perceived the way it should be, what DBS is today and where we're going. So 4 myths about DBS. And DBS was invented to do the same thing on the other side of the brain. So stimulation of the thalamus was basically mimicking the effect of a lesion. And the patient I wanted to show is a patient that had a thalamotomy in the past with good control on one side, but it was shaking on the other. And when DBS was started on the other side, the tremor disappeared. So basically either a lesion or deep brain stimulation or stimulating the brain might make similar results. So the first misconception about deep brain stimulation is that simply because we call it stimulation, people think that we are stimulating the brain, like stimulation, like enhancing a function. But actually, most of the time, we achieve some therapeutic benefit because stimulating the brain, we have an inhibition of the brain. So simply speaking, I know many people might disagree with me, but simply speaking, stimulation of the brain might look like a reversible lesion of the brain. And that's why it's safer than doing a permanent lesion. The myth number 2 is that DBS is a new therapy or is an experimental therapy. Actually, it's not. It's been decades and decades of deep brain stimulation therapy. And the other thing that people sometimes say is that it's something that started in France, which is true. Grenoble was certainly the place where the modern era of DBS started. But there were many cases of deep brain stimulation even before the experience of the French colleagues started, or it was published at least. This is a very nice paper that for some reason is not very well quoted. This is a paper published in 1980, as you can see in the Lancet. And this is stimulation of the brain, again, to treat tremor. But what's fascinating about this particular paper is that this is an example, a beautiful example, I should say, of adaptive deep brain stimulation. So these patients had an electrode on their deltoids, on this muscle here on the shoulder. So anytime they will move their hands, the deep brain stimulation device will turn on so that the tremor will be controlled. So adaptive stimulation, which is something that I'm going to tell you more later on, is something that comes from the past. And that's why, as I said already, we need to know where we're coming from to know where we're going. Number 3, DBS is one therapy. That's another problem that sometimes I see when I talk to patients. And you will always see that there's one patient in the room saying, I got DBS, it didn't work for me. Or I got DBS, my speech is worse and nothing else happened. Or another one would say, DBS changed my life. So DBS is not like taking a pill of levodopa. DBS is such a variable tool that really taps into many different features that the patient has, but also the surgeon has, the technique, the technology, but also where the electrode ends up. So for instance, in this paper that you see here shown, these authors from the States found that there is an increase, very surprising high rate of revisions. So these are people that underwent DBS, they went to maybe a larger center, and in these centers, it was concluded that DBS wasn't working well because the electrode wasn't well placed. So DBS can't be seen as a whole. It depends where the electrode is placed, how well it is placed, and how the patient was doing before and what type of patient you're talking about. So we should avoid generalizing any conclusions about DBS. That's what I want to say right from the start. And number 4 is that DBS is neuroprotective. I know many people are wondering whether this is the case. And I don't think DBS is neuroprotective in a real meaning of the word. It doesn't really change the progression of the disease. It doesn't slow it down. And we know this from different studies, for instance, studies looking at DAT scan. DAT scan is a tool that tells us how much dopamine, in a way, is produced in the brain. And comparing people that had DAT scan and DBS at baseline versus people that DAT scan at baseline but no DBS, and seeing how this DAT scan progressed over the years, made us believe that DBS has really changed the degree of dopaminergic degeneration, for instance, an example of Parkinson's disease. However, DBS introduces a number of changes that we put together in this picture that's going to be published soon. So first of all, this is the example of Parkinson's. Parkinson's patients might have fluctuations, but this usually doesn't happen right away. And as you know, this is called the end of the honeymoon. So people with Parkinson's initially do well, and then there are fluctuations. And now we know that we have two honeymoons, at least. The first one is this one that everybody knows. The second one is what I was saying before. So some Parkinson's patients do very well initially, but then later on, they lose the benefit of deep brain stimulation because other problems come. Dementia, balance problems, gait problems. And this is because there's other degenerations that start to happen. And that's very unpredictable, right? Because it depends on how the patient really is. So this is what happens. But what this graph is also showing is that because of the medication reduction, actually we see positive effect in the long term. For instance, with less medication, people have less hallucinations, less psychosis. They can exercise more because DBS is guaranteeing a better motor control over time. So they are fluctuating less, they're more active, they go out more often. And as we know, it's important to exercise also to change our future. And that doesn't apply to Parkinson's alone. It applies basically to anything, also to people with now diseases. So that's an indirect effect of DBS. Then there is more recent research showing that DBS also reduces in the long term the tremor of Parkinson's patients. Even when the DBS is off and you compare these patients with people that didn't have DBS, you will see less tremor. So meaning that there is some change that we introduce in the disease. So we can probably say DBS is a disease modifier, but for a variety of reasons. It's not just DBS. It's a number of different things that happened meanwhile, and this is what this table this picture is basically showing. Okay, so DBS today, this is the second part of my presentation. What's DBS? Well, we've been talking already for quite some time about deep brain stimulation, and I'm assuming that you all know more or less what it is. This animation shows how it looks like. It's basically, in short, a pacemaker for the brain. And the other important thing that people need to be aware of is that we're stimulating the brain with square waves, pulses. And these pulses have different parameters that we can modify. And I don't want to get too technical here, but this is just to say that simply inserting the electrode is just basically the beginning of the DBS therapy. Then there's a lot of programming to be done. The indications of DBS are many at this moment. I highlighted here the movement disorders that are approved for DBS therapy. Also, epilepsy and OCD are approved in certain countries. And together with this current indications, there are many others that are at the moment under investigations. And if you have time, I can tell you more about these ones if you want. But certainly the bulk of evidence we have is for the current ones. I won't talk about epilepsy, but this is just to say that DBS for epilepsy is another very interesting tool that really keeps me going here. This is, for instance, the first kid with epilepsy that was implanted in Canada. And this little kid used to have more than 200 seizures a day. She had the vagal nerve stimulation that didn't really work well. Well, did some benefit, but not complete benefit. So with DBS, after extensive programming, we managed to go to 0 seizure. And now she has from time to time some seizures, and seizures are maybe building up again. But this is just to say that really deep brain stimulation can be used for many, many things, not just movement disorders, and more will come for sure. How about the number of procedures done in a year? And this is the US data, and which is very relevant to most of the participants of today's webinar. And as you can tell, numbers are going up very fast. This is up to 2011. And many, many procedures are done at this moment, perhaps not too many during the COVID period, but clearly we do year by year more and more. And as you can see from this graph, the total number goes up, and this is mainly because of Parkinson's. So we're doing more and more DBS for Parkinson's disease. DBS in the world, we're trying to be as globalized as possible. And I think it's very important that we also acknowledge that not everybody in the world can have deep brain stimulation. But as you can tell from this map, you can actually realize that most countries in the world right now have DBS. Different story if that is affordable, covered, but at least it's a technology that is really spreading fast. So DBS is the technique. Depending where the electrode is placed, we can have different outcomes. So if we place the electrode in the thalamus, we have a good effect on tremor of any type. It's mainly, however, used for essential tremor. If we place it in the subthalamus, that we also call STN, we have very good effect on all the main manifestations of Parkinson's disease. And this is when we can lower medications. And that's why we also see an improvement of dyskinesias, because we reduce the medications. In the States and in China, many people are now arguing that STN is also a good target for dystonia. Not just dystonia in the context of Parkinson's disease, but just dystonia on its own. But really for dystonia, the main target is globus pallidus pars interna, which is also used for Parkinson's disease. It's a good target. It's probably less effective than subthalamus, but is safer perhaps, and also has a direct effect on dyskinesias. So it's less effective, so people don't reduce medications, but because of the effect of the stimulation of GPI or globus pallidus, we actually see that dyskinesias go away. So it's the direct effect of stimulation of the target that stops the dyskinesia. So this is a typical candidate for DBS in a patient with Parkinson's, young patient, good response to levodopa. Now you see her in the off state. So this is what happened before surgery. And this is the same patient 5 years and 10 years after surgery with no medications. And as you can tell, the patient is much better. And these are the typical good candidates for deep brain stimulation. These are young patients with tremor, good response to levodopa, fluctuations. They have side effects maybe from medications, overall good health, no psychiatric problems, no cognitive problems. And this is when you want to do something more. And usually DBS of the subthalamus works well for these people. But when we decide if a Parkinson's patient is a good candidate for deep brain stimulation, we basically go through a 4-step process, at least in my opinion. And I don't want to be too specific here because I have a lot to cover today, but this is just to give you an idea of why DBS is not a therapy for everyone. So we need to have certain criteria. So people need to have Parkinson's disease. They need to have, as I said already for the patient before, quality of life and functioning impaired by Parkinson's. Oral therapy hasn't been effective or is no longer effective. But then we also have exclusion criteria to consider if people have major systemic conditions like an unstable heart condition or severe depression, psychosis, dementia. We don't really want to do an invasive operation, not because we don't want to help them, but because we know it's dangerous to do that. And then there are supportive criteria. A good response to levodopa is a good criteria to consider. However, an exception to that will be tremor, because sometimes tremor doesn't respond well to levodopa, yet it will respond well to deep brain stimulation. But also patient motivation is very important. And that's why I always talk about these things when I speak to patients. People need to be motivated to be better. DBS is not the answer to all their problems. It's just something that helps them. But if the patient is then spending most of the time at home on the couch watching TV, there's no point in doing deep brain stimulation. But at the same time, if the patient is too motivated, so there has excessive expectation that, oh yeah, I'm going to do DBS so that tomorrow I can run the New York Marathon, or I'm going to do DBS so I stop all the medication I'm on. So those are usually red flags to us, and we don't do DBS in these patients because we're afraid that the patient will be very disappointed after surgery and depressed. And the other important point, and I know that there are caregivers also listening to me today, is the entourage, the family. We don't evaluate the patient alone. We see who is around the patient. And actually, if the patient shows up to the appointment, I usually say, probably it's not a good candidate for surgery. We want to see a caring partner or son, daughter that is there to take care of their parent. And this is because these are very complex therapies that you need someone at home to have a sense of what's going on and maybe talk to the doctor and also help the patient with programming and adjusting the settings at home with the remote control. So we want to make sure that there is enough support. The step 2 is deciding what to go for, what therapy to use. And These are therapies that are available in the States. In Canada, for instance, we don't have subcutaneous apomorphine. And once you know that the patient is good for advanced therapies, that doesn't mean, okay, DBS is the answer. No, you can do different things, including ablation, like the thalamotomy that I was talking about before. And I don't want to spend too much time on it, but we, as doctors, we keep into account the features that you see here listed to decide whether to go for subthalamus or globus pallidus. As I said already, globus pallidus seems to be a bit more versatile. Maybe it's less effective, but it's safer, and we can do it, for instance, in people that are over the age of 70 with good effects and not necessarily risking too much. But we also keep into account the non-motor symptoms. Parkinson's, as you know very well, is not a motor disorder. It's actually a neuropsychiatric condition with a number of other problems associated to it, including constipation. This is a very important problem, or sleep disorders. So it's not just, again, tremor, rigidity, and slowness. And some of these problems, some of these non-motor symptoms don't respond to the different targets that we use for stimulation. I also included some experimental ones like PPN. These problems might respond to medications, and sometimes changing medications after surgery is what causes the problem. And I want you to hear to this patient of mine.
So I was on the patch before I had my DBS surgery, and I wanted to come off the patch because I'd been reducing from 10 milligrams down to 4. And then a few weeks, about a month ago, about 3 months ago, I spoke to the doctors to get off the patch completely. Mm-hmm. As soon as I went off the patch, about 4 weeks later, when I was sort of off the agonist completely, I started to feel very apathetic. And I mentioned this as we were doing the work that we've been doing together. And we went back onto the patch of 2 milligrams. And as soon as I put the 2 milligram patch on, the same day, I lost my apathy, according to my wife.
So as you hear, so a couple of things. This patient was an dopamine agonist, and we always realize that these medications have side effects on behavior and all of that. But we also know that these medications have also an effect on mood and energy levels. And sometimes after deep brain stimulation, we want to get rid of these medications, and we even slow them very. We taper them off very slowly. Yet in some people, and there are reasons why this happens probably, the withdrawal of this medication will cause apathy, something that is being called DOVS, or dopamine agonist withdrawal syndrome. And that's sometimes something that matters to the patient more than having no tremor or no fluctuations. And this is, for instance, when the family is important, because the family in this patient's case was the wife, told us, look, it's not the same. Yeah, it's moving well, but I don't see the man that I used to spend time with. It's very withdrawn, it's apathetic, and this is an example of when the family really helps us. The step 3 is when to do deep brain stimulation. In the past, we tried to wait because we want to make sure that everything was tried. We didn't want to risk an operation if it wasn't really needed. Now we have data showing that if you do DBS early, when it's needed, of course, when there are fluctuations, the quality of life improves and remains improved. Instead, keeping medications only therapy on board does really help the quality of life moving forward. And this is the way I explain it to patients and to doctors, what happens in this context. So there's a social adaptation that is here while there's a motor condition declining. So in Parkinson's, there's a progression of symptoms, but because of medications, because of all the things we do, physiotherapy, exercising, being active, patients do a good job. They have a decent life. They work, they have family, they go out, they see friends, they enjoy life. However, at some point, motor problems become so unbearable that the adaptation cannot really work. So the patient might lose their friends or their job. So in the past, we tended to do brain surgery at this point. And this meant that the patient will have a much better motor condition, but this patient won't be able to go back to his friends or her friends or to their job. So that's why we now spend some time, actually we should spend a lot of time talking about how they're doing. So we should spend less time talking about how many medications a day they take. But what I want to know from my patients is, okay, are you doing what you want to do? Are you traveling? Are you losing income? These are the questions that I need to know, because in some cases, what you want to do is anticipating surgery, because you improve motor condition and you also make sure that the patient doesn't decline from a psychosocial standpoint. Okay, so let's change gear now. Let's talk about Thalamic DBS. The nucleus of the DBS that we use for tremor is called VIM. What you see here is a patient with Parkinson's, but this is the same for any other tremor condition, for most of the tremor conditions at least. And you can see the stimulation of this target has a great effect on tremor. That's a very satisfying operation for patients, families, and doctors. The other thing that I'm noticing lately is that because of focus ultrasound on the news and on TV and all of that, more and more patients are reaching out to us because they heard that there's this new procedure that basically treats the tremor in a couple of hours, and people go home happy and without tremor. And what's fascinating about this is that most of these patients don't know about deep brain stimulation, even though deep brain stimulation for tremor has been around since the late 80s. So what happens then is that more and more patients are these days getting DBS therapy because they get to know about surgery for tremor because of what they heard on the news. And then they happen to know that there is also deep brain stimulation. And some of them go for focus ultrasound, but many others go for DBS. And this graph shows the number of people that were sent to me for tremor management over the years. And this is also a referring thing, because the more neurologists in the community know that that there is something more that can be done for tremor, the more patients we receive from them. Dystonia is a very poorly known condition, but it's actually very invalidating, as you can see in this patient. For instance, this is a patient with a juvenile form of dystonia caused by a mutation of a gene called TOR1A or DYT1. And these are patients that in the past died. So some of them will have this severe spasm that we call status dystonicus, and some of them will die from this condition. Today, we don't see this anymore, or very rarely, because deep brain stimulation of the GPI improves dystonia. And you don't have to have a very generalized condition. This will work also when you have a torticollis that doesn't respond to botulinum toxin. And in this particular case, for instance, you can also notice that the tremor, which is a dystonic tremor, improved. There are failures also in dystonia. And as you can see from this pie chart, most of the time it's because either the electrode is not well placed, which is something I already told you, or because the diagnosis was wrong. And it was, for instance, the functional dystonia. So functional syndromes, they used to be called psychogenic. And those are real problems. These are patients that need help, but this help should not be surgical, because surgery will maybe will improve things initially because of a placebo response maybe, but it won't improve patients long term. The other problem we have in dystonia is that if you end up having surgery when it's too late, you won't get any improvement. So this is a patient of mine. This is an X-ray of a dystonia patient that had surgery relatively early, but it was too late from an orthopedic standpoint. She was having so many spasms that her spine was completely twisted, as you can see. And obviously, doing an operation that helps dystonia won't change the spine. And actually, this patient is now waiting to have orthopedic surgery. Okay, so last part of my presentation is where we're going. So, and there is a lot I should say, and I'm trying to really condense the message in these items that you see listed here. So first of all, patient selection. There are certain patients that on paper are perfect, like this woman. She responded beautifully to levodopa. She had fluctuations, so she was great. Yet after surgery, she had severe freezing of gait, and you can also see the cast she's wearing, where she was falling more after surgery. So, and we don't know why this happens. Some people don't do so well. We need to face it. And we believe that there's a strong role for genetics here. And this is something that is going more and more towards maybe precision medicine. At the moment, we can say it's probably personalized medicine. So this is a recent publication of ours when we looked at the outcome of DBS of the subthalamus. And we noticed that depending on the genetic mutation causing Parkinson's, we will see different effects, particularly a few years after surgery, and also different medication reductions. For instance, GBA mutated patients seem to do very well initially, not so well later on, And not surprisingly, they don't reduce medication too much, even initially. This is just a snapshot of a much more complex topic, also because not all patients with Parkinson's, actually the majority of patients with Parkinson's have no clear genetic cause. But we're working in trying to understand also those little variation of DNA, and we're trying to understand why this variation can have an impact on the outcome. This is something we're calling surgical genomics. We're copying basically from the term pharmacogenomics, which is the study of how genes are influencing the response to medications. Surgical genomics is studying how the genes are influencing the response to DBS or surgery in general. We're also learning more and more from new neuroimaging techniques. This is one example of what we call heat maps. So we basically have a large data set of patients these days, and we can actually see which ones did better, which one didn't do so well. And we can really understand better and better how to be precisely in the spot that improves the symptoms, which is, for instance, the subthalamus here, what you see in yellow, and what makes symptoms worse. That is what you see here in the colder color. And this is another view. And this is for the subthalamus, for the GPI. And this is something we're doing in Toronto, but many centers in the world are really doing this these days. And we're learning more and more really where to go with the electrode. And once you know where to go, you can also play with technology. There are new hardwares that are already, hardware that is already available. And for instance, these are two different technologies that basically do the same thing, which is giving us the opportunity to stimulate with different parameters, different regions of the electrode, so that we can achieve different effects. For instance, you see here in this case, this is a case published 2 years ago. This man, I think it was a man, had some depression, and they stimulated the bottom part of the subthalamus to improve mood. He obviously had Parkinson's, and they stimulated the subthalamus here to improve Parkinson's. But the stimulation in the subthalamus caused dyskinesias. It's something that can happen. But stimulating a more dorsal area of the target, especially here, stopped the dyskinesias. And this man also had tremor. And now the thalamus is above the subthalamus. And so the stimulation in the thalamus also helped the tremor. This is just an example that nicely shows how flexible we can be trying to address the different problems. This is another example that's probably not playing well. I don't know why. But anyways, this is a patient that belongs to a series of other patients where the stimulation was delivered at the same time in the subthalamus and underneath the subthalamus in an area called substantia nigra reticulata to improve gait, freezing, and balance. So we're now doing a trial on this, and we are not looking at parameters like UPDRS, motor diary. We are basically asking patients, tell us what are your problems, what your problems are. And every patient has different problems. As you can see, all patients have fluctuations, otherwise they will not be considered for surgery. But then you notice that the problems change. And after surgery, there are different problems. And then we compared what happened when we use a standard approach of DBS versus a more flexible approach stimulating different targets. And as you can see, there is a different outcome. And this is the first data on 5 patients, but we are now concluded the trial and we are analyzing the data on 10 patients. This is beautifully shown also for another target, this is the GPI. GPI is the globus pallidus, you heard already about it. It's above this target called NBM, or nucleus basalis of minors, which is a nucleus involved in cognition. And more, there are studies trying to see whether the stimulation of this target can improve cognition. At the moment, we don't have good results. I need to make sure that you know this. But what's interesting is that this target is right above the GPI. So inserting the electrode in a different way, we can kill, in theory, 2 birds with 1 stone. And the same will apply to GPE, which is another structure that I won't talk about today. But you know, the reasoning is the same. Directional stimulation, I don't know if you heard about it, but these are new electrodes that are currently available that allow us to steer the electricity. So we can basically, if the electrode is too lateral, like in this example, we can steer electricity towards the target to avoid side effects. Is this really beneficial? Well, it depends where the electrode is. So for instance, if the electrode is well placed, like in the picture A, there's no reason to use directionality. There's no point in using it. It won't make any difference. If the electrode is completely off target, directional is not going to save you. If the electrode is in the target, but perhaps not perfectly located, like in the animation that you see here, then directionality will make a difference. So that's just another tool. Obviously, as you can understand, programming is becoming extremely complex these days. And we're now looking at different ways to program patients. One way is to use functional MRIs. So this is something we're doing right now in Toronto. We are looking at the best content that we know works for Parkinson's in each single individual, so that we could find signature of fMRI activation. And as you can tell, for instance, in this example, when we stimulate different areas of the electrode, we don't see the same signature. And now we're doing a trial sponsored by the Michael J. Fox Foundation, where we basically program patients only using the functional MRI instead of doing a trial and error approach. Another important topic, extremely important these days because of COVID, is remote DBS programming. Meaning, can we program a patient that is living far from us using internet? So this is a reality already in China. There are 2 companies in China that already have a internet-based platform to program patients remotely. I'm a little nervous about it. I think this is going to happen, and there are already North American companies working on it. However, we need to have a safe technology. So wait to hear from the North American companies before jumping on it. I would not necessarily do with the technology that is available at the moment. What you see here is Canada. I guess you know that. You guys are here. I guess you know that too. But what I'm showing here is that these are patients that we saw with telemedicine. So we do a lot of telemedicine in Canada because of the size of the country, and there are not many doctors around, especially when it comes to technology-based therapies like deep brain stimulation. So this is a paper we published a few years ago, and the average distance of these patients from our center, which of course is the STAR, was 800 kilometers. In miles, should be around 600 miles, 500 miles. And through telemedicine and using the patient's remote control, we could program these patients. This is something we also did for dystonia. Basically, we use the remote control the patients have in the advanced mode. So people were given homeworks, things to do at home, changing parameters under our guidance to see whether we could make things faster to optimize DBS. So these are advanced mode, black, simple mode, basically the standard way of programming patients in red. And these are the patients that were optimized after surgery. And as you can see, in terms of time after surgery, they were optimized more or less with the same pace. Basically, it will take a year or so for them to be fully optimized. However, people that use the remote control, so that they were helping us from home in adjusting the settings, they needed fewer visits. So as you can see, they will be optimized with a reduced number of visits, which is very important, especially when people live far from our center. What we also know now, because of deep brain stimulation, is how the brain works. I mean, we don't know all of it, of course, but we know certain things. For instance, we know that there is a biomarker of the off state. So there is a particular activity in the brain that we call beta band, which is a certain oscillation of the neurons, which is around 20 hertz. So basically, when you see a lot of beta band, it means that the patient is in the off state. So this is a marker that the patient is not doing well. And this is without stimulation of the brain. You see beta band is still here, and that's why the patient is moving slowly. But with DBS on board, the beta band is much less, and the patient is moving faster. Why am I telling you this? Well, for 2 main reasons. First, because we have now access to the brain of patients. We can see what happens when people are at home. And second, because we can then move forward towards a new type of stimulation, which is adaptive DBS or closed loop stimulation. This is a patient with Parkinson's, a PhD also, Sarah Regier, and she made this beautiful picture that really shows how little time she spends with her doctor. So the blue dots are the time she spends on her own. The red dot is the time that she spends with her neurologist. And this needs no words. Basically, we don't really know what happens to our patients. As a doctor, I don't know how my patients are doing on a day-to-day basis most of the time. But with technology that allows us to record what's happening in the brain, we can actually have an historical data. What happened in the month before the visit, for instance. We can have a log that tells us how many times they were off, and many more things probably as we understand this biomarker better. This is certainly a fancy topic, and in particular, adaptive stimulation, so stimulation that responds depending on what's recorded in the brain. And I'm sure you all know Elon Musk and his company Neuralink. And yeah, it's fun, it's fancy, everybody talks about it. But let me tell you something, most of the people that talk about it, including people that are investing money in these things, don't really know what they're talking about. It's not that simple as they make it look. Certainly technology is helping, but technology is not the answer. What we need to know is understanding the diseases better, and technology is not going to help there. And actually technology also comes with a price, and that's the last message I want to give you today. So these are the major companies in the world, the American companies I was referring to. And as you can tell, they have different features. They all do a good job with different properties, the different tools that can be used. This technology also changes constantly. It's basically like your iPhone. You need to update the system on a constant basis, otherwise your phone won't work. So this comes with a price. It can be confusing. It confuses patients. It confuses doctors. There are many layers that I don't have time to discuss today, but this is just to say that technology doesn't come without a cost. And sometimes it's actually the real cost of the device, because sometimes they are very expensive tools. And for this reason, a while ago, I did a little experiment, and I compared patients that had received a standard system of DBS versus patients that had undergone surgery with a newer system that had more capabilities. And from the table here, you can see that these patients were more or less similar. We asked them some questions, and they were overall given the same answers. However, the only difference is this one. So when we asked them, how confident are you that more programming will lead to a relevant improvement? People that had undergone the newer device thought that more programming was needed for them to be better. But the programming was done. These patients were, in our opinion, optimized. However, since patients knew that they had a new piece of technology in their brain, think about when you buy a Tesla. You think you can do all you want, but you can't fly with a Tesla. So these people thought that simply because they had a new technology in their brain, they could do even better. And we realized that this has led to a lot of frustration in some of them. And also, obviously, for us, it wasn't really a pleasant journey. So, and this is really the last message I wanted to give you today. So it's good to talk about the future, it's good to talk about technology, but we need to know where we're coming from, and also keep in mind that there are a lot of ethical issues, but also frustration-related problems with new technology. All I do is impossible alone. These are just few of the people I work with. A huge bulk of the help I receive actually comes from fellows, and there are so many that I cannot list them all on this slide. But this is again to thank them all for their support and also what I learned over the years from them. And with this, I'm happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much. That was amazing, Alfonso. Maybe we can just stop sharing slides now so we can see you. Perfect. Okay, well, that was really amazing. I just wanted to give you a shout out for, this is the wHolistic series. So we talk a little bit more about, mind, body sort of connections and stuff. I think I was kind of blown away with a few things that you said. One was that exercise is important and really is disease modifying and life-changing even for people who don't have Parkinson's. I think that's amazing. The second thing you said was that motivation and your attitude makes a huge difference with how you're going to do in the disease. And I think that's absolutely true. And so even after surgery, before surgery, so get off that couch and really have a positive attitude, I think is important. You mentioned a little bit about psychosocial connection and activity and staying vital in your job or in your world, in your community, and your friends, and your travel, and trying to keep people in that zone, not letting the disease progress too far before we intervene with these things. And I think that's a huge part of the message, is really trying to connect and stay active and vital, I think is really important with this disease. One things are, you kind of give up on yourself and maybe sit on the couch, you're really, going to change sort of your outcome, I think, moving forward. So I think that's really an important key, is thinking about the patient in their world and what they're doing and trying to keep them there. And maybe we've been operating too late on some of these patients. And I think that's important. And you also mentioned some of the things that you're looking at with how outcomes are going to be from surgery. And you really mentioned things like patient-centered outcomes, which I think is so important. So forgetting those scoring techniques and the sort of, standard things we've asked, but asking the patient how they're doing and what matters to them and what troubles them, I think that's really mind-blowing, and sort of really thinking about the outcomes. And I think that that's important for how these patients are going to do, because I think, number one, making sure and picking the right patient, it sounds like, is important. Learning about what they're hoping for from the disease, what matters to them, and then after surgery, trying to help them achieve that, to keep, them sort of connected and vital, I think, is so key. I also learned 2 new words from you. I learned about the supportive entourage, which I agree. I think having a supportive network, I totally agree that I think if you're not having social support, it's very hard to thrive post DBS, and having that support is really part of the screening, I think. And then the surgical genomics is so interesting. So those were all really fascinating topics that you brought up. I think there's been a few questions. One is, I think you had brought up the GBA. Would somebody with GBA be not a good candidate then, sort of from your early work, or what's your sense of that?
That's a difficult question, because first of all, GBA is not a gene causing Parkinson's. At the moment, GBA is seen as something that increases the risk to develop Parkinson's. This means there are a lot of other factors in play here that simply referring to one gene is too simple. And also, when you say a mutation of a gene, is not just a mutation. It depends on what mutation you're talking about. So it's very complex, but the general feeling is that people with a GBA mutation tend to have more motor problems moving forward, and also more cognitive decline. So for this reason, what I will do in a patient that I know is GBA mutated and displays the typical features that we believe to be associated with GBA, in this particular patient, I would probably pick the GPI as a target, not the subthalamus, because subthalamus is powerful target that has also an effect on cognition, and you don't want to really tap into an area that might be fragile in that patient. But let me emphasize one more time. I know that the patient is a GBA mutated patient, but she also presents the feature of GBA mutated patients. Because sometimes, especially with 23andMe, I've seen a lot of patients that just do, or even normal people without well, I'm talking about people without diseases or without Parkinson's in this case, they will just go on the website and they will order a 23andMe test, and they come back to the office of the doctor panicking because they were found with some mutation. Genes are not always the answer. It's a starting point. It's important to discuss this with doctors. So I don't want people to jump on conclusion too easily, because it's very complex.
Okay. Another question. So just to kind of get a sense, I think there's been some questions about timing of surgery. So it sounds like before 4 years, we're still kind of getting an understanding of what the disease pattern is going to be. So not operating too early. Operating too late, we might have missed that window where we're keeping people socially active and connected and, vital. So, what's your sense of, the sort of timing in between? There's been a push to do surgeries earlier and earlier and earlier. Could you speak to that a little bit? I know it's a confusing area.
Thanks for the question. I wish I could spend more time on it, but since I had a lot to cover. Okay, so DBS is to be done when it's needed. And it's needed when the patient has fluctuations and or dyskinesias, and when these fluctuations and or dyskinesias are bothersome. You don't have to wait. When you have that, DBS at least can be considered. Then the patient might not want to do it. I want to try, I don't know, trip to Hawaii and see whether I get better, whatever. But this is where you want to think about it. If you don't have any fluctuations or dyskinesias, there is no reason to go for an operation that doesn't make you super normal. That's why it's important also levodopa responsiveness. So if the patient responds 50% with levodopa, we assume the patient will improve 50% or so with DBS. It's not going to get better than that. So you need to have DBS simply to make sure that you don't have those fluctuations that are unfortunately associated with levodopa use at some point. You will have the same effect, but in a constant manner. You will be the same in an even fashion. This is what DBS really does. It doesn't make you better than you were on levodopa. Now, as for the time, I agree entirely when you say you don't know, and this is what I said, you don't have to wait too long, otherwise you lose the chance to really have a better psychosocial situation. But at the same time, making DBS doing it too early is a bit problematic for a number of reasons. First, if a Parkinson's patient needs DBS so soon, it means, you know, two things. First, that patient was diagnosed late. He probably had Parkinson's for years and years before, and it wasn't understood correctly. And we have seen this particularly with young onset Parkinson's disease. The other possibility that is very important for people to be aware of is that if you need something more than just medication 2 years after the disease onset, you might not have Parkinson's, you might have multiple system atrophy. So in the past, we had monographs to deal with where it was said that DBS should be done in people with Parkinson's for at least 5 years. Then they dropped that to 4 years. Now it's not mentioned anymore. So there's no mention of how long you need to be having Parkinson's for to be considered for DBS. Fine, but if I see a patient with Parkinson's that needs DBS 2 years after the disease, something is wrong. Either the diagnosis was much earlier or that patient doesn't have Parkinson's. And what happens if you do DBS in someone without Parkinson's? You make things worse. So
yeah,
this is how we define when to start.
There have been questions about that in the chat. So if you have idiopathic Parkinson's disease is what we're really talking about. It's not the Parkinson's plus disorders or the secondary Parkinson's like vascular and things like that. It's really this group of patients that responds with robustly to Parkinson's medications, and your doctor thinks that you have regular idiopathic Parkinson's disease. Is really.
Let me clarify one thing also, because Benjamin, but also Hugh are on I saw them, they're among the attendees, and they're gonna kill me if I don't say that. Parkinson's disease doesn't exist, let alone saying idiopathic. Idiopathic, you know, we're trying to stay away from these words. We call it Parkinson's diseases right now. But what we mean with Parkinson's disease is a condition that a Parkinsonist that responds well to levodopa. So it's a very practical way to talk about the disease. I realize that. But at the end of the day, Parkinson plus syndrome like PSP, MSA, and vascular Parkinsonism, if we believe that it exists, they don't respond well to levodopa. So simply speaking, we use levodopa responsiveness to have a sense of what type of condition we're dealing with. Even if we don't know exactly why that patient has what we call Parkinson's disease, at least that is enough information that tells us that DBS will work. So we need to, the deeper we go into this, the more confusing it gets. I realize that. But we basically, the message is, if you have a disease that responds well to levodopa, DBS can be considered. And MSA, PSP, all these other conditions don't respond well to levodopa.
That's very good. So I think we have literally 2 minutes left. This has flown by, Alfonso, as I knew it would, and you are just prolific. I mean, the future research that you're doing with the genes, with the patient-centered outcomes, with all of the imaging, I'm blown away. I don't know how you're getting, I think you do love this actually in the end. I think because you're spending so much, you spend all your time doing this, otherwise you wouldn't be so productive, but we really appreciate it. And I wanted to give you a minute or two to close, say something inspiring, maybe say something, you know, to help our patients kind of keep the dream alive right now.
Oh, well, I guess, ask like this on the spot, it's difficult for me to find something inspiring, but I think I should say probably that I'm inspired by patients more than anything. And so my piece to inspire you guys is really to keep pushing your doctors, you know, keep asking questions, keep, you know, complaining. And this is what really motivates us to do more and more on a daily basis. So a while ago, a few days ago, it was all over the news, this new picture that depicting Parkinson's disease that was published in JAMA Neurology. Because if you Google Parkinson's disease and the first picture you will see is this old man, bending forward with a shaking hand. That's not Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's disease are warriors. Parkinson's disease, I will say also thanks to doctors and the therapy that we have, are really in charge of their life now. And it's becoming a win-win because they are doing more and more to motivate us and also to help us. In Toronto, we have a patient advisory board. And they tell us what to do, basically, almost. So they guide the research, because as I said at the beginning, research per se has no reason. We need to do what we're doing to help patients. We got to be very practical. And neurologists tend to think too much, and we're on our cloud. And so my last comment is, keep doing what you're doing and be pushy, because doctors learn from patients.
Well, thank you so much, Alfonso. I know you're on call and you have so much to do.
Okay,
so I so appreciate you taking the time. And I know that you are passionate about patients and moving, our field forward. So I so appreciate you, and we'll have to have you back because there's so many more questions. But hopefully you're reading the comments here that everyone loves.
I was seeing that. and by brain fables and ending Parkinson's disease. I wish I had brain fables too, but it's on its way. All right.
Back to you. I will send it back to you, Rebecca, for our goodbye
wave. Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Fasano. This was wonderful. I think everyone else feels that way. We do have another program in about an hour. If you want to join us, feel free to check it out on our website. We do have programs almost every day at this point, and hugely in thanks to Dr. Subramanian, who helps us get these amazing speakers. So thank you, Dr. Subramanian. Thank you, Dr. Fasano. And we're going to just wave you off, and we'll see you next time, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks.